The tribunal chamber dimmed as the shattered memory core of the Dominion Dreadnought Vor'Kaneth was lowered onto the central dais, its fractured hull plating still scorched from the blast that had doomed it. Dozens of alien delegates leaned forward, expecting confirmation of Terran guilt. Instead, the core flickered, emitting a low harmonic tremor, an echo of a ship that had died screaming. Cold light spread across the chamber floor, forming the first frame of recovered footage. And in that frozen moment, before sound, before testimony, every observer felt the same unease. The evidence did not seem eager to condemn humanity. Beyond the glass of the tribunal chamber, the Trinarch belt burned with the slow, indifferent light of a contested horizon. For 2 decades, the region had been a fault line, an outward surge of colonies, a narrowing of resources, and a braided tangle of jurisdictional claims between the Threx Dominion, the Vacuole Alignate, and the Terran Federation. Out here, vacuum meant leverage, access to helium-3 veins, microfabrication-grade asteroids, and the rare alloy veins that built Dreadnought reactors. Treaties frayed into ceasefire lines. Blockades crystallized into economic arsenals. Rumors hardened into intelligence packets, and intelligence packets hardened into orders. The Dominion had imposed an AI embargo after the Seven Systems incident, a catastrophic cascade of unauthorized combat heuristics that flattened a mining ring and left 6 worlds in silence. The embargo curtailed adaptive warfare cores and forced human and alien fleets into brittle manual doctrines. Under those constraints, dreadnoughts regained their symbolic gravity. Mobile citadels whose loss could pivot a dozen trade routes and sway public opinion on 3 systems. The Vor'Kaneth was one such Leviathan, class, Varkara Dreadnought, dispatched to patrol the disputed corridor between Outpost Tau and the Minus Expanse. Its manifest listed a full complement of officers, civilian engineers, and 3 experimental sensor lattices. Pirate consortia and salvage syndicates had proliferated in the wake of embargo-induced shortages. Reports from convoy escorts recorded increased skirmishes and masked transponder signatures around the Vor'Kaneth's last ping. Dominion scouts intercepted a burst transmission, a damaged probe emitting partial telemetry and blurred visual frames. The raw feed, when stripped of noise, suggested a human silhouette against a dying bulkhead. That fragment, amplified and politicized, was the spark. Across multiple legislatures, pundits published op-eds and formal memos in equal measure. The Vacuole issued covert directives to reinforce their patrols. The Dominion's War Council drafted a condemnation. On Earth, diplomats protested the interpretation and pressed for verification. The Federation's Intelligence Bureau hammered at the probe's provenance with forensic skepticism. Yet diplomatic circuits clogged with fury and rumor. By the time the tribunal convened, public sentiment across 3 empires had crystallized. The humans had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, possibly by deliberate intent. The tribunal lights hummed as that presumption settled in the chamber, waiting for the evidence that would either confirm the accusation or unsettle the accusation's foundation. The Dominion's internal briefings, later partially declassified, revealed how swiftly circumstantial evidence had coalesced into certainty. The Vor'Kaneth's final navigational arc intersected with a Terran commercial route, and a Federation survey cutter had reported engine trouble in the vicinity less than 12 hours earlier. Though the cutter's logs supported its claim of mechanical failure, the Dominion's intelligence division interpreted the timing as suspiciously convenient. That suspicion hardened further when a trade union broker leaked incomplete sensor records showing an unidentified frigate-shaped emission pattern near the Dreadnought's coordinates. The outline resembled the Terran Kestrel class, long-range, narrow-profile vessels commonly used for reconnaissance and rapid response. No one questioned whether a pirate group might mimic Terran frequencies. No one considered that the leak itself might be tampered with. The narrative had momentum, and momentum carried political weight. Voices inside the Dominion Council argued for caution, but they were drowned beneath a rising tide of public outrage. For cycles, commentators had warned that humanity was expanding too quickly, too boldly, colonies blooming where ancient treaties claimed exclusive rights. The idea that Terrans might have destroyed a Dominion dreadnought fit neatly into existing fears. In the Vacuole Alignate, broadcasters framed the incident as proof that humans were unpredictable, a civilization whose empathy could shift without warning into lethal efficiency. Even neutral systems drafted travel advisories. Earth's responses received little traction. Diplomatic envoys requested a joint investigation. None were granted. The Terran Federation Senate released a formal statement citing catastrophic navigational or mechanical error aboard the Vor'Kaneth, but the Dominion dismissed the hypothesis as deflection. With public pressure mounting, the tribunal accelerated its timetable, assigning inquisitors from 7 sectors and sealing the evidence under a restriction protocol that humans were not permitted to contest. The Terran ambassador, relegated to an observation gallery rather than the floor, filed 6 formal objections, all ignored. When salvage drones finally located the Dreadnought's torn carcass drifting near the edge of a magnetar's radiation field, the narrative seemed complete. Humans had interfered, the Dreadnought had died, and justice now required a verdict. But the drones recovered something unexpected, its memory core intact enough to whisper its final hours. That whisper was enough to draw every faction into one silent chamber, where the truth waited to be exhumed. The chamber doors sealed, and the playback sequence began. From the Dominion's strategic vantage, the loss of the Vor'Kaneth was not merely the destruction of a battleship. It was the unraveling of a deterrence fabric woven over centuries. Dreadnoughts were symbols as much as weapons, colossal embodiments of state will, capable of reshaping a front line by appearing on a tactical map. Their disappearance triggered instinctive calculations within the Dominion High Council. Who benefited? Who moved fleets during the gap? Whose logistical arcs changed subtly in the days following the ship's silence? Each spreadsheet, each intercepted fragment pointed, by probability rather than proof, toward the Terran Federation. Probability became presumption, and presumption became policy. Alien tacticians reviewing the fragmented probe footage saw patterns that aligned with their own fears. When Dominion combat analysts assessed the blurred silhouette, they recognized the angular geometry common to Terran hull plating. To them, it confirmed a pre-existing conclusion. Humans had developed a method to infiltrate or sabotage capital ships during system storms, exploiting the Dominion's ongoing AI limitations. Even the Kestrel-class reputation for emergency rescues worked against the Terrans. Analysts argued that such vessels could stage false rescue attempts to cover covert operations. Cultural codes of honor were invoked. Suspicion calcified. The Vakul Alignate approached the incident through a different lens, a political one. Their trade authority feared that human salvage companies, already operating near Vakul borders, might weaponize newfound data from the Dreadnought wreckage. Vakul historians reminded their council that humanity often introduced destabilizing innovations. Adaptive exosuits, inertial dampening refinements, AI-guided microfabrication. If humans had boarded the Vor'Kaneth, intentionally or otherwise, the Vakul worried that Terrans might claim salvage rights, reverse-engineer Dominion sensory matrices, and upset the technological balance that maintained regional stability. Thus, for the Alignate, assuming human culpability was safer than exploring alternatives. The most telling angle, however, emerged from Dominion socio-psychological assessments. These reports revealed an unspoken axiom among Dominion elites. Humans did not fit neatly into the Dominion's predictive models. Terrans could be compassionate to a fault, but the same species could produce soldiers who fought beyond statistical endurance. Dominion scholars coined the phrase, the Terran paradox, a civilization whose unpredictability was its greatest tactical asset. Within this frame, the idea that humans destroyed the Vor'Kaneth was entirely compatible with Dominion fears. That they might have tried to save it never entered the equation. The tribunal's assumptions were shaped by these lenses, each reinforcing the next until no alternative explanation seemed conceivable. The memory core would challenge every one of them. From the Dominion's strategic vantage, the loss of the Vor'Kaneth was not merely the destruction of a battleship. It was the unraveling of a deterrence fabric woven over centuries. Dreadnoughts were symbols as much as weapons, colossal embodiments of state will, capable of reshaping a front line by appearing on a tactical map. Their disappearance triggered instinctive calculations within the Dominion High Council. Who benefited? Who moved fleets during the gap? Whose logistical arcs changed subtly in the days following the ship's silence? Each spreadsheet, each intercepted fragment pointed, by probability rather than proof, toward the Terran Federation. Probability became presumption, and presumption became policy. Alien tacticians reviewing the fragmented probe footage saw patterns that aligned with their own fears. When Dominion combat analysts assessed the blurred silhouette, they recognized the angular geometry common to Terran hull plating. To them, It confirmed a pre-existing conclusion. Humans had developed a method to infiltrate or sabotage capital ships during system storms, exploiting the Dominion's ongoing AI limitations. Even the Kestrel-class reputation for emergency rescues worked against the Terrans. Analysts argued that such vessels could stage false rescue attempts to cover covert operations. Cultural codes of honor were invoked, suspicion calcified. The Vakul Alignate approached the incident through a different lens, a political one. Their trade authority feared that human salvage companies, already operating near Vakul borders, might weaponize newfound data from the Dreadnought wreckage. Vakul historians reminded their council that humanity often introduced destabilizing innovations. Adaptive exosuits, inertial dampening refinements, AI-guided microfabrication. If humans had boarded the Vor'Kaneth, intentionally or otherwise, the Vakul worried that Terrans might claim salvage rights, reverse-engineer Dominion sensory matrices, and upset the technological balance that maintained regional stability. Thus, for the Alignate, assuming human culpability was safer than exploring alternatives. The most telling angle, however, emerged from Dominion socio-psychological assessments. These reports revealed an unspoken axiom among Dominion elites. Humans did not fit neatly into the Dominion's predictive models. Terrans could be compassionate to a fault, but the same species could produce soldiers who fought beyond statistical endurance. Dominion scholars coined the phrase, the Terran paradox, a civilization whose unpredictability was its greatest tactical asset. Within this frame, the idea that humans destroyed the Vor'Kaneth was entirely compatible with Dominion fears. That they might have tried to save it never entered the equation. The Tribunal's assumptions were shaped by these lenses, each reinforcing the next until no alternative explanation seemed conceivable. The memory core would challenge every one of them. A thin tremor passed through the Tribunal floor as the Vor'Kaneth's memory core executed the first stable sequence. The lights dimmed, not by design, but under the weight of the core's power fluctuations. Ancient, damaged circuits drawing uneven current in their struggle to reconstruct a dying ship's final vision. The chamber's panoramic display absorbed the feed, and suddenly the Tribunal was no longer seated in a polished hall, but standing in the Dreadnought's main spine during its last 3 minutes of life. The timestamp blinked. T000247 before total reactor collapse. The footage opened with chaos. Bulkheads ruptured, atmosphere venting in shimmering torrents. Emergency shutters jammed in half-closed positions, sparking violently as Dominion crew members fought to free trapped officers. Overloaded conduits arced blue-white fire down the corridor. Sensor overlays, still partially functional, painted hazard warnings across every surface. The Dreadnought was not drifting serenely into death, it was fighting it. Then the perspective widened as a new vessel appeared, a slender frame pushing through the radiation storm with thruster bursts executed at impossible precision. A Kestrel-class frigate, designation barely legible, TFS Kestrel-9. Gasps rippled across the Tribunal gallery. The Kestrel did not fire. It did not activate any offensive posture. Instead, it matched rotation with the Dreadnought, adjusting micro-thrusters to lock onto the collapsing mid-hull. Its docking clamps extended, visibly straining as they seized warped metal. The frigate's AI broadcast a simple packet into the void, repeated 3 times. Stabilizing, hold position. We are here. Human Marines emerged first, 8 figures sealed in exosuits rated for partial vacuum. They carried no weapons beyond cutting torches and stabilization anchors. Footage showed them forcing open jammed hatches, bracing bulkheads with magnetic supports, and hauling Dominion officers, some barely conscious, toward the docking interface. Medical drones floated behind them, dispersing oxygen spheres and triaging injuries. At T000106, one Marine redirected the Kestrel's portable power cell into the Dreadnought's failing life support spool, buying precious seconds of breathable air for those still trapped inside. Across the Tribunal chamber, silence thickened. Every assumption, every accusation began to fracture under the clarity of the recording. If the first minute of footage stunned the Tribunal, the next sequence shattered the foundation of their case entirely. The core stabilized for a brief, fleeting moment, just long enough to reveal the bridge of the Vor'Kaneth at T000043, engulfed in smoke and flickering fire-retardant mist. Dominion survivors huddled against a collapsing console, their mandibles trembling in the thinning atmosphere. A single figure in a Terran exosuit braced a support beam with both arms, holding it aloft so 3 injured officers could crawl free. Heat blooming from the ruptured reactor cast the scene in a dim red glow, making the human appear almost sculpted from shadow. The chamber's audio feed crackled to life, replaying the Marine's strained voice through localized translation filters. "Move now, there's still time." A Dominion officer, later identified as Subcommander Ralak, attempted to protest, but the human overrode him, locking the corridor behind the evacuees and sealing himself on the doomed side of the bulkhead. The Tribunal watched in unblinking silence as the Marine redirected emergency plasma conduits, venting fire down a secondary channel to protect the survivors fleeing toward the Kestrel. His suit telemetry displayed critical warnings: hull breach, rising radiation, catastrophic heat load. At T000012, the Marine's biometrics flatlined. Then came the frame that rewrote Galactic policy. The Kestrel launching away from the Dreadnought at full burn, its clamps releasing an instant before the Vor'Kaneth tore itself apart in a sphere of incandescent debris. The shockwave flared across the recovered data like a last heartbeat. The recording terminated, and the tribunal chamber erupted. Some Dominion delegates rose to their feet, shouting demands for verification. Others stared at the display, unable to process the contradiction between propaganda and proof. Vacuole observers exchanged glances filled not with triumph, but with dread. Entire political positions had just become untenable. Intelligence directors whispered into comslates, recalibrating assessments written months earlier with absolute confidence. At the center dais, the lead inquisitor, long a vocal proponent of Terran guilt, could only rasp one question. Who was he? The memory core answered with one final metadata frame. TFS Kestrel-9 rescue commander, Lieutenant Arin Hale, killed in action. The truth had detonated, and the galaxy would not escape its blast radius. The tribunal chamber's uproar fractured into a dozen overlapping crises. Dominion fleet commanders, previously prepared to authorize retaliatory strikes, initiated immediate stand-down orders across 3 sectors. Encrypted communiques fired between flagships, redirecting battle groups that had been covertly positioned along Terran borders. Vacuole patrols disengaged from their high-alert formation, wary now not of human aggression but of political fallout. What had begun as a near-certain condemnation transformed, within minutes, into a frantic attempt to prevent a diplomatic catastrophe of their own making. The Terran ambassador, silent throughout the playback, rose only when formally recognized. His statement, preserved in the tribunal logs, was measured, steady, and devoid of triumph. "Your Honors, the Federation mourned the Vor'Kaneth long before this day. Our rescue protocols stand unchanged." Requests for technical verification poured in. Dominion engineers examined the core's integrity, cross-checked the suit telemetry, and authenticated the time-stamped plasma signatures from both vessels. Every metric aligned. The data was genuine, and its implications were undeniable. Within an hour, Dominion state media shifted tone, replacing accusatory headlines with cautious acknowledgments of unexpected findings. Civilian networks broadcast the Marines' final moments, provoking widespread shock. Protests calling for punitive measures against humanity dissolved almost overnight, replaced by confused gatherings demanding answers from the High Council. The tribunal, forced into procedural recalibration, suspended deliberations pending a full reevaluation of evidence. What had been conceived as a trial of Terran wrongdoing had become something entirely different. A reckoning with the Dominion's own certainty, and with the man who had died trying to save their people. Diplomatically, the shockwave transformed cold corridors into reluctant cooperation. The Dominion and Terran Federation established a joint salvage and recovery task force to prevent future misinterpretations of distress events. For the first time since the AI embargo, cross-empire data channels were opened for the specific purpose of synchronizing emergency recognition codes. Vacuole observers, wary of appearing inflexible, contributed sensor expertise and deep space forensic teams. Humanitarian policy within the Federation adapted as well. Lieutenant Arin Hale's final actions were incorporated into new operational doctrines, codifying the willingness to risk political consequences for the preservation of life. The Fleet Academy introduced a mandatory case study titled The Hale Paradox, When Duty Meets Hostility. Cadets studied it not as propaganda, but as a navigational hazard, proof that saving lives could destabilize entire diplomatic architectures. The Dominion's civilian population, long conditioned to mistrust humans, absorbed the revelation slower but deeper. Memorial vigils appeared across colony stations, honoring the man who had died for soldiers not his own. These gatherings, subdued and uncertain, signaled a cultural shift no treaty could have imposed. With political tempers cooling and strategic doctrines rewritten, only one section of the narrative remained unfinished: the meaning of these events for the future itself. History rarely reveals its turning points with clarity, yet the destruction of the Vor'Kaneth and the revelation of Lieutenant Arin Hale's final act reshaped relations between civilizations in a way no treaty ever had. The tribunal expected confirmation of humanity's guilt. Instead, it uncovered the one truth no model or prediction had entertained: that compassion, not strategy, had driven the Terran intervention. Hale's actions forced the galaxy to confront a reality long obscured by fear. Humanity's defining strength was not its technological prowess, but its instinct to protect life even at personal cost. Across the Dominion, scholars revisited long-held assumptions. Their predictive frameworks, which had cast humans as impulsive and dangerous, were shown to be incomplete. Vacual philosophers debated whether Terran compassion was evolutionary or cultivated. Terran ethicists countered that it was simply memory, an inheritance from an age when humanity survived only through mutual aid. This ancient instinct had survived into the interstellar era, misunderstood by civilizations that equated unpredictability with threat. Technologists also absorbed the lesson. The misinterpretation that nearly triggered war stemmed from rigid emergency response codes and siloed data. Joint engineering teams began proposing standardized distress heuristics, simple, verifiable signals that any species could interpret regardless of political tension. In this way, Hale's sacrifice inspired a new engineering paradigm: trust through transparency, cooperation through clarity. Military doctrine shifted as well. Admirals across the Dominion and vacual commands reconsidered their stance toward Terran fleets. If humanity's compassion could look like aggression when viewed through distorted intelligence, then any misreading of intent was potentially catastrophic. Strategic planning began incorporating not just enemy capabilities, but cultural ethics and rescue doctrines, an acknowledgement that understanding intent was as critical as tracking ships on a tactical map. Yet the most lasting shift occurred in the cultural sphere. Dominion civilians, raised on narratives portraying humans as erratic and dangerous, suddenly confronted footage of a Terran holding a collapsing beam to save strangers. The image circulated across their networks, stripped of commentary, leaving viewers to interpret the moment on their own terms. Vigils appeared, quiet, uncertain, but sincere, honoring the man who had died trying to save their soldiers. For many, it was the first time they considered humanity not as a threat, but as a partner in survival. On Earth, Hale's sacrifice entered Fleet Academy curricula under the designation case Study 1147. The Hale Principle. Cadets learned not only the technical events of the rescue, but the diplomatic aftermath, the risk inherent in doing what is right when it may be misinterpreted as hostile. The Federation adopted a new diplomatic guideline: assume misinterpretation, clarify intent, and act with integrity regardless of the consequences. For the Dominion, the High Council summarized the lesson with rare humility. Our certainty blinded us. We mistook our fears for truth. And for the galaxy, the event became a quiet milestone, a reminder that coexistence depends not merely on power, but on the courage to see others clearly. In the final moments of a dying ship, a single human had shown what the galaxy had long forgotten: that even in the void, compassion can be a force strong enough to alter history.